So this presentation is about regulation. Regulation is a very nasty topic for biomedical engineers. It is a limitation to innovation. So it is not something we study with a heart full of joy, but it is as unavoidable as gravity. Okay, regulations are part of everyday work for biomedical engineers. So that's why we are trying to speak about regulation since the very beginning on the design, because it is a limitation of to the design. My experience in the industry relates a lot to design planning and testing the design concept against both clinical and safety requirements. And regulation is mostly about safety requirements, so we will try to give as much examples as we can and try to explain how regulation is going to impact all the phases of the life cycle of the medical device. Remember Carmelo this morning, he was showing you that a medical device has a very long life cycle going from design all the way to disposal. And we have an impact on all these life cycle parts, mostly in the design, testing, and manufacturing. So I will try to give you an overview of the European regulation and some comparison to international regulations. So we will try to find a way to have information that is applicable for worldwide regulation. So here are the topics, very quickly. What is an essential requirement, and how does it relate to safety and efficacy? What are international standards? How do we use them for the design and manufacturing? And then, how do we give proof that we met these standards? So how do we plan for testing? I have a special interest in preclinical testing because, to my personal experience and my sensibility, it is very important that we biomedical engineers work hard on the ethics part. As Andres was saying, it is a privilege to use a human being to test your ideas. Even if this human being is in need, it is a privilege to be part of the path of curing a person. And it is also a privilege to use a living being, even if it is not a human being. So from rats on, it is a privilege that you use the existence of this living being to test your ideas. So it is very important that we understand how this testing can be planned to have good information from our testing and to be able to present this information to the scientific community, to give strength to our ideas. So this is the only picture in the whole presentation, so please enjoy it. What do we have in common? Okay, on this side of the slide you have the most beautiful medical device ever. We, biomedical engineers, we enroll in the university because we want to design heart valves, don't we? Or sometimes maybe hip implants or things like that, or defibrillators. No one of you wants to design an incontinence pad. But those, they have something in common, right? They have the patient in common, and they have the regulation in common. So they are all under the same main structure. This is another picture, and it is an example of how medical devices can interact with the human body. You have an extracorporeal circulation machine, which to me is the most invasive thing I can think about. It interacts with all the main systems and organs of the human body. And on the other hand, you have a software for surgical planning. You don't even know who the patient is. Maybe there's no patient there. So there is no interaction with the human body at all. But they both are medical devices, and they both have to respect some standards for safety. So here I just listed some examples. At least half of the people in this room is wearing reading glasses or myopia glasses, and those are medical devices. I hope no one of us has an implantable medical device here. I hope you are so young you don't really need a heart valve or a hip implant, do you? Maybe some of us have a dental implant. So the impact on the population is great on medical devices, even to silly little things as Band-Aids or gauze, or surgical gloves. You are keeping the patient safe with surgical gloves. You are saving people lives with infusion sets. They cost 1.2 euros sterile, but they are keeping people alive. So it is very important that we understand what they have in common, so we can have a common strategy for designing them, and we can use our knowledge to different kinds of pathologies, different kinds of technological innovations, but always keeping the regulation for safety and efficacy in mind. So what do they have in common? They are used on people. My neighbor, your neighbor, okay, or your best friend maybe, or maybe yourself. So it is important that we understand the patient is not an abstract being. It's just the person that you are meeting when you go and when you go shopping, okay? So they have a medical purpose. They are intended to have a beneficial impact on the patient's state of health. There are some very interesting new innovation in biomedical engineering for bioenhancement, and maybe we will have time for speaking about that, for making an athlete stronger or faster. But this is not our first aim. Our first aim is to take a human being and restore his health situation. And then they are not drugs. So we don't know anything about metabolism, okay? We know a lot about sensors, we know a lot about mechanical interaction, we don't know anything about human metabolism. We are not designing drugs. But then, once we have found this core that is in common, we know there are so many different technologies. We can have active devices, meaning they use energy to work. We can have non-active devices, meaning they don't need anything to work. They are just powered by gravity. We can have devices that are used for a few seconds. Think of the defibrillator. We can have devices that are used chronically. Think about dialysis machine. We can have devices that are used for the whole life being. Think about a cochlear implant on an infant. He's going to rely on this device for all his developmental and adult phase. So they are very different to each other. They are both all of them under the same legal framework. Most of them are purchased by health organizations. They are not a free choice of the patient. That's why the regulators are so interested in medical devices and in the standardization of medical devices, because they should not be left to the pure free will of the patient. Sometimes patients, they don't have the skills to understand what is safe and effective for themselves. And then there are some dedicated laws, because manufacturers, they have to make a living out of the sales of the medical devices. So they also have to be profitable. And many of you will work in the industry, and they will have you will have a very strong drive to have a profitable medical device. Not only safe, not only efficient, also competitive on the market. So they are very difficult. It's a very difficult frame. I will try to present the European situation according to regulation, because it is a very good example for the worldwide regulation. What does the regulation do? First of all, gives us a definition. What is a medical device? And then tells us that not all the devices are there for the sales. Some devices are not mass-produced for the sales. Some devices are custom-made, and now we are seeing a huge amount of custom-made devices with 3D printings. And some devices are just used for research. This doesn't mean that they should not be safe or effective, but at least it means they are not obeying to the same commercial rules as other devices for mass production. The main core of the directive is safety. So the essential requirements for safety, they are a list of requirements, a list of small rules that you have to follow to be sure you're not hurting the patient. But then the regulation goes a step forward. It is not just assessing what you designed, it's also forcing you to keep an eye open on your device and see if the patients are reacting in the right way. This is what's called surveillance. We observe the way the device is working on the patients over a long period of time to understand if our choices were safe enough for the patient, and to understand if there are any exceptions to the general statistics rules that we chose when we defined the patient. For example, Andres was defining what is a patient for the bruxism, but maybe he didn't evaluate all the different variability that we can have in patients. Maybe we have patients that are partially edentulous. Did you take them into consideration in the first part of the design? Maybe not, but they are there. So we have to make surveillance to understand the limitations of our design. So there are some authorities, the ministries of health, are controlling your work. They are inspecting your work. And maybe some of you will work in the competent authorities as an inspector. It's a responsibility of the Ministry of Health, of the competent authority, to decide if your device is safe enough. So these regulations are laws, meaning if you break the law, you go to jail. The jail is a nasty place, okay? And you don't really want to go there to finish your career. So you want to comply to the law and to give documented proof that you complied to the law. The law is giving you information on how you are supposed to be managing the design, the testing, the way you build the device on a mass production, the way you are testing for quality, big lots, big quantities of medical devices. Think about how many syringes are sold worldwide every day, and they all have to comply, all and each of them have to comply to safety standards. You cannot control them all. So there are strict rules on statistical control of medical devices. And then surveillance and return information, as we said. In Europe, we have a nice database that is helpful to compare information. In the United States, they have even a better database. So when you go and you look for clinical data, and you are working on literature search, I am talking mostly to the students that are studying to start their projects this afternoon. When you are looking for literature, please look into the databases for incidents, people that was killed by medical devices. There are interesting databases on malfunctions of medical devices that you can use to get inspiration about what you don't want to do in your design, okay? As we said, the medical devices are tested by the competent authorities and by the notified bodies. You can easily imagine there is no money for testing everything. There are no resources, no time, no expert people. So the competent authorities are using their resources where they think they are more appropriate. And they are using more resources for control and for testing for devices that are considered to be more dangerous for the general population. Okay, so they are divided into risk classes. The higher the class, the more important it is that competent authorities and third parties control the device. Because you can realize that a Band-Aid does not need the same amount of control as a cochlear implant. And you can realize that it is more worth to spend money on testing devices that have a strong impact on the health than on single-use disposable devices. And here are some of the rules that are used to understand which are the most important criteria to decide what is a dangerous medical device. The students that will draft their projects, they will have to understand how their device is working, because once they know how the device is working, they will be able to decide the class. And please use the platform, because the platform is going to guide through this decision by questions. It's going to pose you very simple, short questions. Okay, we divided the information in small bits, so they are easier to process for you. There are also some special classes. Those classes that are considered so dangerous, they need special attention. For example, devices that use parts of donated tissues from humans, or use parts of the carcass of of an animal. And there are so many out there. The heart valve that we saw in the first slide was made of a bovine pericardium. And it is considered to be extremely dangerous because there are so many diseases that can jump from one species to the humans. And of course, there is at least one project that involves a medicinal substance, which is the aerosol device. You are going to provide a medicinal substance, so please take in mind that dealing with drugs is dangerous. So here is the classification. You have, sometimes the regulators, they like to play little tricks to normal biomedical engineers. Like they have 4 classes, but they are called 1, 2A, 2B, and 3, just to make things a little bit more complicated. So the worst class is class 3. And you can see the examples here. Devices that include drugs or they come in contact with the heart or brain, those are the most dangerous devices. And then we go down the classes, all the way to non-sterile gauze or things like that. Many of the devices that you will have to design are in class 1, okay? The foot drop is in class 1. I will think about it. So, this is the scope. What is the aim of the regulator? The regulator it doesn't want to foster innovation. They don't care about innovation. They don't really need to stop innovation, but it's just fine. You can just go on and making the same device over and over again. The regulator is not going to push you. Okay, innovation does not come from rules. Innovation comes from the market or from the academia. What the regulators want is safety and efficacy. And those concepts are very, very strict. I think understanding what safe means is not difficult. Okay, you don't really want to damage the patient while you're trying to make him better. So the definition is very easy, but the way you prove your device is safe can be very challenging. Think about a pacemaker. How do you prove it is safe? There are so many ways it can damage the human body, right? And you have to avoid them all. Effective, it means it works. Again, the definition is very easy. The patient was sick and now he's healthy. It's a very easy definition. But how do you measure and how do you give proof of this? There are some devices that are so easy. I can't see anything. You are all blurred. Now I see you, and some of you are already sleeping. And some other devices, they are so difficult to understand if the patient is having any advantage at all. Think about calculating on a statistical way the efficacy of a surgical glove. It's impossible. What do you measure? Let's just have surgery on the patient, and half of them, the surgeon will not use the gloves, and let's see how many of them die. So it's challenging. It is challenging because you have to find a way to demonstrate your device is effective. It means you have to know the clinics. You have to know the clinical parameters of your patient to measure them and give proof they improved. And it's not easy sometimes. Think about the devices you have to design this week. How will you measure that it worked? How will you measure? You need a number, right? We are engineers. At least 2, 3 numbers to make a nice statistics. And in publication, they love it. They have these very nice graphs with statistics. Maybe let's put some colors in the pictures, okay? So let's think about it, because you need to give proof. It is not a description. It's statistics. But you cannot use your patients as guinea pigs. First of all, you have to make sure that they are safe. You cannot take a patient and have this patient go through multiple MRIs because you need more data. It is not good for his health. You cannot take a patient and ask him to come for a blood test every single day because it is not good for his daily life. Do you agree with me? It can be challenging. And the regulators are there, and they want numbers, and they want proof that you respected the ethical requirements of a test. So if you're afraid, you can go now, and no one will remember. But if you stay, there is much more. So something more. Before you go and touch the patient, you have to be sure you are not damaging his health. So the safety requirements must be met before you start the clinical trial. And this is very ethical, very clear, and also very challenging because the time to market is going to be much longer this way. You have to finish all the safety testing first. And then, how do you give proof of this? We have a nice checklist. We are engineers. We love, right? We love a little nice table. And we tick all the boxes. So it's a very tick box approach. I did this, this, and this. And now the device is safe. For example, we spoke about having a device that is not giving electrical shock to the patient, a device that is not giving an infection to the patient, a device that is not giving an allergic reaction to the patient. Okay, not, because we are avoiding risk. Sometimes your word is not enough. So after you are done all the checkbox approach and you think your device is safe, someone else is going to come and check your work to decide if your checklist is completed and you actually performed all the safety testing that are needed. And this is the work of the notified bodies or the competent authorities to make sure you completed your full list of testing. So here is the list, the essential requirements. There are some requirements that are common to all the devices, and then other requirements that are chosen according to the characteristics of the devices. For example, if it is an implantable, you have a sterility requirement. On the other hand, if it is a medical app, you will not have that sterility requirement, right? So you have to choose which are the list of testing that are applicable to your device, and you have to show that your choices are coherent and adequate to the device that you have in mind. So sometimes deciding if a device should be or should not be sterile can be challenging. Would you have a requirement for sterility on a device that goes down the throat and into the stomach? Sometimes you say yes. Why? You are ingesting food every day. That's not sterile, is it? So you are choosing to avoid a small risk in percentage. There is such a small risk that you have, as you say, bad bacteria not surviving to the acid environment of your stomach because you think the consequences would be very bad. So it's a small probability, but a high impact on the patient health. And then this is telling me you decided you want to use your time and money to avoid a risk that is not very probable, but very dangerous. So you're making an estimate, right, of the situation. And would you have a requirement for calibration to a thermometer for deciding if you have a fever or not in a home setting? So I am a young mother and I have my boy, I'll touch his forehead and I want to know if he has fever or not. What is your requirement for calibration on this device? Are you going to spend a lot of money and use a lot of very complicated equipment for a full-scale calibration? Again, it depends. So these kind of choices are choices that biomedical engineers must do, and they must explain them to the regulators, okay? So it is not just, oh, this is a boring thing and let's just check the box. You have to choose which boxes you want to check and how. I have so many examples for this, so let's go on. Thanks God we have so many ISO standards that help us in choosing which are the correct testing and how to approve or reject the results of the test. So here are the standards. Standards are a good thing because they are written by international community of scientists. There are no politicians in these committees. They are a great example of the way a scientific community can sit together and issue a document that is valid for everyone. And here you have a list of just some of the most important technical standards. And then each of your devices will have a dedicated standard. Most medical devices have a standard that is carrying their name, which is just helpful because you don't have to invent the way you want to test your device. It's already there. So where do they come from? As I said, from international organizations. These are scientific societies. The good part of this being a scientific society is that politicians are not involved. The bad part is that these people must be paid. And they are paid by the copyright that you pay to read these works. So these documents are not free to download because you have to pay the people who wrote them and pay the people that are, of course, rendering them available for a very long time. Some of these standards are so important that they are also part of laws in some states. So in Europe, some of the international standards are also made into law. And here are the standards that are also state law. You can recognize them because they have an additional logo. And why are they so important? Because the inspectors, the reviewers from the Ministry of Health, they will accept your results. They will not challenge the results of these standards because they think they are just enough to make sure that your patient is safe. And that's why they are so important. You don't need to invent anything else. You just need to follow the kind of testing and approve or reject your design according to the results. So you don't have to invent a new kind of testing, which sometimes makes biomedical engineers lose lots of times. If you have to invent a new test for testing your device, you are not actually improving with your design because you don't know if your design is approved or not. You can't go on with your invention until you are able to test it. So sometimes having a ready-made method of test is very useful. How do they write the standards? For risk control, okay. So there is a growing approach to risk control. As I said, testing in vivo and testing on patients is a privilege. So first of all, we try to test bench or in vitro, and then we decide if we are ethically allowed to use living beings. They are not only there for explaining how to design, also for explaining how to test and how to manufacture. Here, the last two standards, in particular the ISO 13485, teaches to the manufacturers how they have to control their production. I don't know if you ever, if anyone ever mentioned to you what is a clean room, a special environment for manufacturing medical devices. They are not built on your kitchen table, are they? You build them in a special room. And how this room is managed, what are the controls on this room, and how you should behave into this room are listed here, because you have to make sure you don't get dirty medical devices reaching your patient. And if one of the operators on the production floor goes like this before they touch an implantable medical device, well, it's not a good choice. So there are rules for this. Rules on how to control the environment, rules on how to test the devices before they are sold. And this is all very new because in biomedical engineering university you are taught how to design. You're not usually taught how to control, but it is at least as important as designing. So here is the evaluation over time. We spoke about this. So who are we trying to protect? Of course we are trying to protect the patient first, but not only. Okay, we are also trying to protect the surgeon. We don't want our surgeon to get an electrical shock from the medical device he is using, or to get a nasty cut, or to get a puncture from a needle that was used on a contagious patient. We also don't want the wife and children of our patient to be hurt by our medical device. Think about oxygen therapy. Bottles for oxygen therapy are devices that are compressed air devices. They are like bombs. Think about your patient with his little bottle of compressed oxygen, walking and taking a bus. Do we really want to take care just of the patient or of all the other people who are sitting on the bus with him? If the valve explodes, what is going to happen to the person who's sitting next to him on the bus? And again, we have to take care of the general environment, because these devices, once they are used, they are dirty with blood, and we don't want this blood to touch other people. So the majority of the medical devices is incinerated, which is not very good for the environment. Think about the quantity of plastic that comes from hospitals that is incinerated every day. Incineration is the safest way for disposing devices that came in contact with the human blood. But think about the damage you're doing to the environment when you incinerate these kind of plastics. Urine collection bottles or pouches. Think how many urine collection pouches are incinerated every day all over the world. So it is very challenging. This slide is just to scare all of you who are going to work in the industry. The manufacturers, those who have an economical gain from selling the medical devices, they also have lots of obligations. Not only testing, and not only testing on patient, but also making sure that every device that is sold is at least as safe as the one that was firstly tested. So you have to have a consistent level of quality. Every pacemaker that you build should be as effective as the one that went to the competent authority to be tested. Every heart valve, every syringe, every Band-Aid, because the patient is going to use exactly that medical device, not the master, not the one that went to the test laboratory. So you have to make sure you give a constant level of quality. And this is it's a legal obligation. If the manufacturer fails, they go to jail. And the biomedical engineer with them. So here is the life cycle. I think this slide is very similar to the one that Carmelo showed this morning, so we'll go quickly through it. To me, the most challenging and most interesting part is the design and verification, but there are so many more co-workers and colleagues, biomedical engineers, that work in the other parts of the life cycle. The assistants. Think about how many medical engineers are there for the maintenance and assistance of patient monitors, dialysis machines, any kind of anesthesia machine, or any kind of infusion pump. They need a lot of maintenance, right? So it's a very challenging situation to be there just to make the assistance without being part of the design. This is very boring, so I will be very quick when I go through it. Documentation. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Health and also your mentors this week, they will want to read what you said and read it in a complete and, let's say, cross-referenced way. So documentation must be complete. I want to know as a mentor, and I want to know as an inspector, which is one of my positions, what you did and why, and what you tested, what were the results, and what was your reaction if any results were not the ones that you expected. So please write down everything you do. The best way of doing this is a nice traceability table of your design where you list all the activities you did. So as part of the UBORA project and as part of the biomedical engineer daily life, please write down what you did. This standard, the ISO 13485, we spoke about this standard because it explains us how to manufacture. It also explains us how to manage the documentation for design. So we used this standard to draft and to plan how the UBORA platform would be presented to the users. You will follow the UBORA platform and you will learn how the ISO standard wants you to design. I hope this will help you in your future career, because you will apply some techniques that are expected to biomedical engineers in the industry. And I think it was a great choice of the project to follow this standard from the very beginning. It's going to be a bit boring, but at least everything you need will be there already when you go back and check. This is another standard I wish to be able to use with you. It's the risk management. What you did was risk management without knowing it was called that way. You are trying to understand how big is the problem, how often it may happen, and if it is worth using your intelligence, your resources to prevent it. Because little things, you can just accept them, right? You don't need to use your time and efforts to avoid little, small problems of everyday life. So we are trying to use our resources to solve huge and very dangerous design faults and design pitfalls. And we are taking care of the details in the next slide. So here is the risk management. First of all, you try to understand the ways your device is going to kill the patient. How will I harm the patient if I do something wrong? And then once you have the list of the huge risks you really want to avoid, you try to invent a cheap, convenient, and reliable way to prevent this damage to the patient. The regulation is very clear. There are at least 3 ways to prevent damage to the patient. The first is the perfect biomedical engineering way, safe by design. But sometimes there is no safe by design solution. Maybe you can't find it. So you rely on alarms and protections. There are so many monitors and sensors that trigger alarms and protections to the patient. Because you cannot avoid heart fibrillation sometimes. You just need a very loud beep, beep, beep to call the clinician, right? So your device cannot avoid the risk, but at least it can alert of the risk. And then the last but not least is the information for safe use. Think about all the things that you ever saw, even off the shelf. There are so many devices that have a nice number 2, which is canceled. Do not use 2 times. Single use only. This is an information for safe use, because the first time it is sterile, but the second time it is not sterile anymore, so it's going to be dangerous. Information for safe use is very important because it is the only way you have to talk to your patient or talk to your clinician to tell him the right way to use your device. Use it in a sterile field. Use it only in a closed environment. This defibrillator cannot be used under a pouring rain. It's information for safe use, and it means the difference from life to death, both for the patient and the operator sometimes. So this is for manufacturing quality. We'll go fastly through it because it is not part of the design school. Just because I want you to remember there are standard operation procedures for all the steps of the industrial process, and that's it. Here, okay, let's just think about this slide when we design a medical device, because we want our idea to be successful in real life. So a medical device that cannot be manufactured in a mass production floor is not a winning idea, okay? Maybe it's a nice innovation, but you will never be able to sell it. So please think about this flow, take a picture of this flow, and test your idea towards having a manufacturing flow that is acceptable to commercial standards, or your innovation will stay on textbooks and will not go to real life. As we said, there are so many standards for testing the design. There are many standards for testing the production as well. Those 2 that are at the lower part of the slide are very important because we need to make sure our operators are keeping the device clean while they manufacture it. So take a few minutes to think about the protection you need for your patient and how you want to protect your patient from the contaminants and bacteria that can come from the operators and builders' hands and environment. Probably this is the last slide. So the very last standard, and I really want to spend a couple of minutes here, a standard for planning clinical trials. Any of us who ever studied clinical trials know that the best way of studying a clinical innovation is a randomized, double-blind, controlled trial. Are these words clear to you? Okay. Now, please plan a randomized, double-blind, controlled trial of a hip implant. It's impossible. You need to find another way. You need to apply your biomedical engineering skills to designing a way of having important information, keeping your patient safe, and collecting clinical data. All of this without blinding, because it is just impossible to blind a surgeon and tell him, oh, we don't know if biological heart valve or a mechanical heart valve is better. Can you just not think about the differences while you implant them? It is plain impossible. Okay. We can not even blind the groups. What are you doing? Are you performing a scam surgery on a patient for a shoulder implant? You cut him, you stitch him up without changing the bones or the joints, and you tell them, how do you feel now with your new bone implant, and you didn't change it? Do you think this is ethical? This is just plain impossible. So it is very challenging, and this standard is going to ask you to present data from animal models before you think of the best way of testing your device on human beings. Animal models can be very challenging, so it is an important part of biomedical engineering to be able to choose the correct animal model for testing your device. Big animal models like pig or pork and sheep, goat are very widespread, and they have different pros and different cons. So please, when you develop your medical device, let's think about the animal model that may be applicable, or if you want to skip the animal model and go straight to the clinical trials. And I think this was the last slide, yes. We are a little bit earlier, which is just fine. It was my plan, because I would like to try and make some examples with your projects. Maybe it can be helpful for the rest of the week. So if there is any project that you remember, or any of the teams that are here, we can try and make some examples, okay? Think about it.